probability.
It has been discussed in physics, for example, by David Deutsch, who says that probability is kind of like flat Earth society. It's a misconception. It's something that has no useful practical value. So he says that when we say things like a recession is probable, it's the same like saying the omens are such that we might have a recession. So it's sorcery. And I want to talk about this in the following context. First, we have a lot of people now talking about the risk of a recession, and there's papers written by prominent investment banks saying the probability of a recession has gone up. So if we follow Deutsch, and I tend to follow him because I think he has that ability to capture the essence of something, then I have to say, yeah, I mean, there's some truth. The problem I have right now, I'm not so sure how to reconcile this. So what is the practical way to look at things? This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's April 19th, 2022. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we're up about 5%. The market's up 2% for the year. We are down 11.5%, 11.8%. The market is down 6.5%. We're underperforming by 5.3%. The probability of a recession has gone up. This is a statement you can hear across Wall Street. Every media outlet that has some sort of economic weight is talking about this. And I just came across this discussion inspired by Brad Hall. Shout out to Brad Hall once again. And he pointed out a lecture that David Deutsch gave about probability. I highly recommend. I put it in the show notes. So this lecture basically says, in a nutshell, probability is sorcery. It doesn't really serve anything. And when we say the probability of winning this card game is high, is 70%, it's like saying the omens are saying that I might win. So he's basically saying probability is sorcery in a sense that it might work. It might help us navigate through life like sorcery did, or any kind of superstition. But it's not the kind of thing that the Enlightenment and the scientific community would sign up for in this day and age. And I think we all want to be in the zeitgeist of the scientific method, one way or the other. In other words, we don't want to believe in sorcery and omens. And therefore, we want to take this seriously and say, okay, look, if I tell my partner the probability of a stock market correction is going up, then I'm basically telling her, listen, the omens are telling me that the probability, that the market will come down. Or I just did a yoga session, and my feeling is it's going to happen, and so on and so forth. And of course, that's not how we want to work. Now, having said that, I had a episode not long ago where I spoke about that kind of thing, and where I mentioned that, look, sometimes we do have a gut feeling. John Haidt talks about this a lot, like the rider on the elephant. Our brain is the rider on the elephant. The elephant is the whole limbic nervous system that collects information from everywhere, and that gives us clues that we might not even know we have, and then the brain rationalizes it. So putting all this in context, now let's discuss what does it actually mean. I mean, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. We have a situation in the market where the 10-year treasury has gone up from 1.8 to 2.8%, 100 basis points, which is a massive move up in the yields. We have a situation in Ukraine that is driving up commodity prices. We have a situation in the United States and in Western Europe, but particularly here, where there is people don't want to work. People don't want to work for whatever salary they're getting. There's a situation of stagnation, and there are signs that we might stagnate. And I don't want to use the word there's probability of this and that, because I just want to be in the sort of culture of David Deutsch now. The question is, well, how should I deal with this whole stuff? Because I have to run a hedge fund. I have to make decisions now that might impact me in the future. So I'm the farmer in the medieval times that has to plant the crop, and I don't know what's going to happen with the weather. In other words, I'm the sailor that goes out, and all these things that we can't predict as humans. We then, of course, fall back into superstition, and I don't want to do that. So I want to think about this more thoroughly. first, again, I don't want to say the probability of recession has gone up because this is a no-no now. So what is going on? Well, there are signs in the market. Market pricing is telling us that there's problems, that there's strains in the market. This is a fact. This is 100%. Because what Deutsch says in his lecture is there are things which are, and then there are things which aren't, and that's it. There is no such thing as something is 70% or 60%. That's a non-statement. So there's things that are, and there are things that are not. So what is? The 100% rise in 10-year treasuries is. The increase in oil price is. The increase in nat gas price is. The increase in housing costs in the US is. Those are facts. That life is becoming more expensive for people is. Those are facts. In other words, what we call facts, what we have been calling facts for decades now, and maybe it has been a little convoluted through the whole misinformation campaign started by Trump and then by the COVID people and the non-COVID people and the all this stuff. Anyway, I don't want to go there. We just have this situation now where we don't trust information. Well, we we still have it, but let's just leave it at that. There is such a thing as truth and not truth, at least when it comes to facts. The 10-year treasury is up 100 basis points in the last couple of months. It's a fact. I'm not going to discuss that, the validity and if maybe there's a multiverse where that hasn't happened and maybe we are in that multiverse or any of that stuff. It's useless. Okay. So it has happened. The fact that labor costs are going up, but not high enough to compensate for cost of living, that's a fact. So a lot of things are fact. And given that, we can say the market is stressed. And look, I don't have a solution as far as the physics and the metaphysics and the David Deutschian attack towards probability is concerned. I haven't thought about it deep enough. But what I can say is that I think it's valuable for a hedge fund manager at least, and probably for a person in life in general, to stick with what actually is. For example, I'm digressing again to my son. He's a soccer player. He wants to go pro, and he is in a similar situation where there's a lot of unknowns and unknowns, and there's a lot of things. What if this? What's the probability that I can make? Now, here's the thing: if you do the probability that my son makes as a professional goalkeeper, if you run the numbers, the probability is probably zero. Why? Because I don't think there's any professional goalkeeper in the world that has been born in New York City and has lived most of his youth and teenage life in California, San Francisco, and then become a professional soccer player. So if you run the numbers that way, you will get zero probability. But this is exactly the problem with probability. If you look at statistics and if you look at these types of numbers that say, well, so far, in the last 200 years, this has happened so many times, and the probability is X and Y and this and that. That's the problem with probability. The problem with probability is that we can't run an infinite amount of multiverse splits and then see if my son will make this a professional athlete. You can't. But what you can do, and you can actually follow David Deutsch's argument, which is anything is possible, which is not disallowed by the laws of physics. So in that sense, my son can absolutely make it as a professional soccer player. So what else is there? Well, what else are the clues? My son is one. I mean, he is an entity of one. That means he can't rely on numbers. And this is one of the biggest fallacies that Deutsch points out when it comes to probability, when he says that, well, it started with gambling, and it's kind of an oxymoron that gamblers say, well, I hold these cards, and given what I have in these cards, so many times before when people had these types of cards, they won or lost, and now I'm going to make a bet. This is a fact because you're the one. You are in a one situation, and it doesn't matter if if there's a 60% probability that you're going to win. If you put all your assets on the line and you lose, you lose. You're not going to get 60% win or something like that. And this goes back to a statement that my partner actually Zominar used to say when we started the hedge fund, which was an interesting statement. She would say, never invest in something unless you're willing to put all your assets in there. And what does that really mean? It means that you don't want to be caught by probability. You don't want to say, well, there's probability of, because you're not going to invest all your livelihood into an asset if there's a probability of, if there's not a probability of one that you're going to win, or at least very high in the 90s. And now that I'm thinking also, Richard Taylor, my professor at Chicago, prominent sort of probabilistic behavioralist type professor. I don't remember what exactly he said, but he said something along the lines that there's no such thing as a 70% chance of winning. There is either a 99% chance or a 0%. And we humans are only good at assessing these types of probabilities, the very high and the very low. We're not good in the middle. And why aren't we good? Because, like David Deutsch says, because that's sorcery. That is not science. And we can't use our logics to do that. So we can use our limbic system, and we can use the John Haidt argument, the rider on the elephant, the gut feeling. We can say, well, the gut feeling's telling me we're going to have a recession. That's fine. But, certainly that's not scientific, but it's fine. It's okay to have a gut feeling, because what does it really mean? It just means we don't have complete information. That's what gut feeling actually means. So now let's put this all into context now. What exactly am I saying? What I'm saying here is the following. What I'm saying is that we have a situation where we have information out there, and unless we can put a probability of 1 or 0, we shouldn't be talking about probabilities. That's what it really means. So we should not be involved in situations where there is some sort of ambiguity about things. If there is ambiguity about things, we can rely on gut feeling, or we can just ignore it. Because we can't, it's even though it's maybe important to talk about the macro situation, if I can't have a 100% probability or a 0% probability statement about these things, then it's irrelevant. So one of the conclusions here is that, well, then maybe I want to be in a situation, I want to try to push my life towards situations where I have very high or very low probability. Basically, I want to start the Chiara Marletto type life of counterfactuals where I'm in the 0 or 1 type situation. I don't want to be in a 0.5. My life cannot be about, well, there's a 70% chance that I make it here, a 30% chance I make it there. I want to move towards situations, towards junctions in my life, any of my investments, anywhere that matters, where I can say there's a very high likelihood I make it. So my son should move himself to situations in, let's say, in soccer, where he has a very high likelihood to succeed. He has to train in a specific way. He has to go where the competition is not so strong. He has to get the best coaches, get the best people, increase the chances for him to make it. So he doesn't have to live in sort of an omen type world. Elon Musk is trying, at least, with very high, with a very big drive, he is driving towards a situation where he can say the likelihood of success is very high. Now, he himself uses a lot of the word probability, and maybe somebody should talk to him about this. But nevertheless, he puts himself in situations, at least when it comes to his businesses, where where the chance of winning is very high. See, I almost used the word probability again. The chance of winning is very high because all the little micro decisions start becoming 1 or 0s. Should we use the battery in this way or that way? If we use it this way, then the probability of success will be almost 1. If we use it that way, it will be 0. If we put a factory here and there, the probability of success will be 1 or 0, or in the high 90s. All the micro decisions. A company is run properly if people can make decisions such that whenever they make a decision, it's either a 1 or a 0. This sounds a little bit abstract maybe, but it is very helpful advice. I hope this comes across. It's very, very important. Because what I think is going on here is that we have a situation now where we can start channeling our life towards situations with high conviction. Drive towards situation with high conviction. This is a good life advice, and it has to do with the fact that probabilities are not such good. It's just not very useful. And now when it comes to investing, we want to be in a situation with high conviction. And I think this is what we've been driving towards at Orange Capital Partners in the last couple of years. The
disruption is driven by the cost of iteration. If you can lower the cost of iteration, the chances of winning as a disruptor are high. So it's about the cost of iteration. How do you lower the cost of iteration? By putting yourself in decisions where whenever small decisions are made, the probability of success is always either 1 or 0. You don't want to be in a 50-50 world. You don't want to be in a we'll see, we can see world, which is what we sometimes kind of derogatorily call the third world way, when you go to a doctor and he says, well, I don't know, we'll see, there's a 50-50 chance you will survive. You don't want to be in a world like that. You want to be in a world where people say this is going to succeed and this is not going to succeed. You want to be determined. And if you're not determined, then you say it. I can't say. I can't say about this, I can't say about that. So have a determined world, have a 0 and 1 world. Try to think like that. And then over time, you will put yourself, I think this is also, once you manifest yourself towards those types of situations, you will win. Because I think you will start, I mean, this is now me, a conjecture, of course, but you will start thinking like that. If I think as an investor that I can only invest in things where I put all my money in, then I would start thinking differently about those investments, thinking differently about what kind of information I'm looking for to make that decision, and so on and so forth. And I think this is what drove us towards the concept of the lower cost of iteration. Iteration is not a function of time. Excuse me, compound interest is not a function of time. It's a function of iteration. The number of iterations, the more iterations I have, the better my chances of success, and the lower the cost of iteration, and the lower the cost of error correction, of course, the more iterations I can do, so the faster I can disrupt. This is in general what's going on here. And it applies to investing as much as to life. So the conclusion here is that we believe that this concept of probability that David Deutsch is attacking in the lecture that I put down in the show notes, it is a very valid point. It's a valid point not just for science, but for anybody in the world. It's an important point, and it's a point that drives you towards thinking away from 50-50 type decisions. Try to have a life where all the micro decisions in your life are driven by zeros and ones. It's either highly or likely or unlikely, and that's it. And and then also drive, you will manifest yourself, your portfolio will manifest itself. One of the examples is, like I said, you will only invest in things where you are ready to put all your assets in. You will only ski down a mountain when you know that the probability of surviving is 100%. You will not do things that are 50-50. It just is not good policy. And if you can manifest your life towards that 0 and 1 thinking, over time, you will get into situations where by nature you will start driving down the cost of iteration, increasing iteration, because then iteration becomes zeros and ones, and you want to have an iteration with 0 is as valid as 1. If I can say, oh, I'm 100% not going to do this because it's not successful, I'm going to do that because that's much, much better. It's both very valuable. And this is how we run the fund. And this is how we reconcile David Deutsch with the investment world and the real world, the rest of the world. And I think it's incredibly valuable. It's one more thing where I think David Deutsch has been able to contribute tremendously to the operation of Orange Capital Partners. Thank you.